Right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this Chapel in New York webinar. Today we'll be discussing stewardship without borders, and we're really looking at how do we take good care of our international donor relationships. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please keep yourself muted during the conversation, but when we open it up for Q&A, you're welcome to either unmute, ask your question, or you can put it in the chat. And on that note, please do pop your questions into the chat. We will allow time at the end for questions and answers. So as things come up, please put them in there. Generally, we'll be kind of holding all those to the end, but if I will be watching the chat, so if something comes up and it's kind of you didn't hear something or it's something that should be clarified in the moment, I'm happy to make sure that that gets addressed. Otherwise, we'll go through your questions at the end and try to answer as many as we can. Really happy to have you all with us today, and I'm very excited to have with us our featured speaker today, Tanya Surratt. She is someone I've known for many years. We were just talking before we came on live. We don't even remember how long it's been at this point, but we both met when we were in New York together. We have a number of things in common, one of those being interest and experience in fundraising in a global sense, international cross-border work. Tanya is also a CFRE and a Association of Fundraising Professionals Master Trainer, as am I, so we had that in common. But Tanya brings a lot of skills and experience and vast knowledge to our conversation today. In addition to being an international expert on the Chapel in New York team, she's also the president of Synergies in Philanthropy Consulting, provides strategic and team-centered solutions to increase nonprofit innovation, revenue, and effectiveness. She's a senior nonprofit and fundraising consultant, facilitator, trainee, executive coach. Her coaching is amazing. I highly recommend. And she's an expert in cross-border giving, philanthropy, donor engagement. Tony grew up in Germany, moved to the US, and has then lived and worked internationally since. Worked for over 25 years with international organizations, helping both foreign-based NGOs and charities create a presence in the US, adapt to fundraising culture in different countries, fluent in German. Really just an incredible expert to have with us today. And I know that what she brings to our conversation on international stewardship will be valuable and useful to you. But with that, I will stop speaking and I will hand off to Tanya.
Heather, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, all of you who have been joining this session this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're zooming in from. It's a real honor to be with you this afternoon. And first of all, a big shout out to Chapel in New York for being a leader in the field of international philanthropy and global fundraising. It's a very unique community that Chapel in New York brings together in these monthly sessions. And we have now an hour together to really dive into what global stewardship can be for your donor relationships, and what global stewardship can really look like for your organization, no matter where you work or where your organization really has the impact. But before we dive into the material, we are super curious individuals, because fundraisers have to be very curious in their work. We would like to launch a quick poll to ask you, where are you zooming in from today? Sue is launching the poll in a second, and see what region you are currently in. Either you work in that region, you're zooming in from that region. We would just love to get a sense who is together with us this afternoon or morning. We got a little bit of a sense from the RSVPs, which really showed us there is a global community coming together to the session. but we want to give all of you a sense of the wealth of knowledge, the wealth of experience that is in the room that spans continents and different regions in our work. And Sue, whenever you're ready, I think, maybe you close the poll. I think we had
Okay.
plenty of opportunities to choose your region, and let's see what we tell us. Oh, wow, that's a great community, big community in the United Kingdom who's joining us. Welcome. Some from the European Union. We have at least one person, I guess, from Asia. That's remarkable in terms of the time difference. Thank you so much for your commitment. And a number of colleagues who join us from North America, the US, or Canada. Thank you all. That's fantastic. We look forward to, learning and being with you in this session. Okay, let me just scroll my little scroll here in the right direction. So we will learn a lot about global stewardship today. That's our topic, but by any means, as much as we work in the international space, we are experts and we are not experts at the same time. And what do I mean by this? You all have your feet on the ground. You work with organizations, you work with donors. You know sometimes much more than actually we do. We learn together in that space. So I want to really invite you to continue the conversation after the session. If you see some of the learnings today or some of the our experience in that space, you see, oh, wow, but in our community, it's very, very different. Our donors react differently. That doesn't work. Please let us know. We learn together in that space, and we would love to hear your voices. A second. Okay. There's one other poll we want to launch, Sue, a poll that gives us a little bit of a sense how many of you in your day-to-day work steward global donors. It might be you have a good pool of prospects, current donors, past donors. How many of you are deep into the work of global stewardship, working with international donors, and bring them closer to your organization? And Sue, whenever you see there are enough people who have filled a poll,
Yeah.
by any means close it, and we take a look what we see on the screen. Oh, so that's interesting, Heather. That's an interesting mix between those who really do it on a regular basis, over 50%. Another 1/3 really does it occasionally. So that means like you really have a lot of experience already in that space as well. And some of you are not doing it yet, but I think you're very curious about the topic overall, but it seems like we are all really have a lot of experience together in the space of working with and stewarding international donors. Thank you so much for taking part in the poll. Okay, what we'll cover today for you, we will focus on a very particular segment of donors. And if you see on the screen, I want to make a note of, we use different terms when we talk about, our, let's say, our focus population of donors today. We might call them global donors, you might call them international donors, we call them donors from abroad. They can take different roles within your organization. They also might have different nationalities. They might be, foreign citizen. They might be expats. They can take all different shapes and forms a little bit and have different relationships with your organization, which is really important to note because sometimes not, again, goes back to one size sometimes doesn't fit all. And you have to know that this is really a very diverse pool of individuals who give to your organization that we are talking about today. We are trying today to focus on giving you high-level roadmap on how you can think about global stewardship. It's a possibility for you to look at a new direction in your own global stewardship practice and way how to approach it in your work. We will talk a lot about what that means, stewardship in a global world. We will talk about donor mindsets across borders, because we have to know and learn about how our donors think and feel in order to basically get it as right as possible. We are looking at different stewardship practices in key markets, the US, UK, and Central Europe. And we're looking at other meaningful touch points that can be done, that you can do in your work when you build your stewardship plan, what you can incorporate to make it very meaningful and lasting for your donors. And if we have time, we talk a little bit about the case for support, how to tailor it, and what role it plays in the stewardship, in our stewardship work. And we will talk also about how testing and feedback directly from the donors that you are trying to steward well, how that can help you in your practice. So global stewardship, let's look at that together. Open up your chat for a moment and do me and look at the sentence here. We are asking, stewardship is about thanking donors. It's almost like that's what we're all really familiar with, that what comes first to mind when we think about thanking donors and stewarding donors. But what else comes to mind when you think about the word stewardship? Use the chat for a moment and plug in your ideas and your thoughts into chat. And I already see there is a lot coming up with regard to relationships. I see a lot happening with regard to showing appreciation. I see staying very connected, providing value, showing the impact, cultivating the next gift. Excellent. So when you look at that, it's really interesting because you really hit the mark on why stewardship is so powerful. You mentioned a lot of those. I mean, a key driver and connector of all of what you have written is about the relationships and the connections. It's an opportunity to strengthen, and I think Hannah said it here in the last comment very well, strengthening relationships and building a sense of connection, part of a community. That's really excellent, kind of really, wraps it all together in one beautiful statement, what the power of stewardship is, in particular in our global fundraising world. So in a fundraising sense, and again, this is not anything new, this is just like a little bit of a reminder of us, what we are trying to, look at together a little more closer. Yes, we have stewardship as a gift as a way of saying thank you to a gift and building this long-term relationship, as Hannah just said. And it's all about the gratitude piece, right? It's the mindset of being grateful for what you've received. It's the art of making a donor feel seen, valued, and connected. It's all about giving the donor also insights into, bringing insights to your donors. It's the intentional practice of caring for your donors. What we call like it's a follow through, you build this relationship, you follow through on your commitments. And it's a top influencer and predictor of future fundraising success. And we saw that coming up also in some of your comments. So when you look at stewardship, it's a very powerful tool that we are trying to really nurture and be very intentional about in our practice as fundraising professionals.
Tanya, could you say a little bit more about what you mean by intentional practice?
Yeah, it's a good question. Intentional for me is that stewardship has to be a priority in your organization and not just an afterthought. Stewardship is also much more than the thank you letter, right? So intentionality means like knowing that stewardship has a tremendous power to, as you see on the screen here, even really predict and plan for the gifts in the future, to build lasting relationships, which are the key driver for future giving. And intentionality means like you have to really make it a priority, plan for it, create a plan around your stewardship practice that makes sense for you and your organization. Something that I mentioned later in the presentation, but I think it's important to mention also, I said before, not one size fits all. And please keep that in mind for whatever you hear and how you, what resonates with you, because everybody comes from a different place of fundraising practice. The organizations have different sizes. Your global donor pool has a very different makeup. All that impacts your own intentional stewardship plan that you build for your organization. But as long as you plan for it and build this in, and not just stop with a thank you letter that is being sent out, hopefully soon after the gift was received, then you're in a place of creativity, in a place of really leveraging what stewardship can hold.
Awesome. Thank you.
So this is like a little of a different recap, but important, I think, on this slide, what I wanted to point out here for all of you is that there is, when I was looking at the session here and thinking about, there's so much about stewardship, but it came to me, there is a very blurred line, or maybe not a line at all, between where stewardship ends and engagement and cultivation begins. So you will hear some of what we hear today in our session, and you think like, oh yeah, but that's what we do as a cultivation tool. And you're totally correct. A lot of what we talk about, in a stewardship practice, in the flip side, is nothing else but a cultivation tool. So that's where the lines between stewardship, well done and intentionally done, and engagement and cultivation of donors really blurs, which is, I think it's interesting, particularly in this globally connected world, where we want stewardship to be much more, I would say, intentional even than in an organization that has donors, in the same city or down the road, where you don't necessarily have different ways of connecting more naturally with your donors that you don't have in this global space. So think about it like this, whatever we talk about today and what reminds you of, that's actually an engagement tool, engagement technique. It really is. But on the flip side, it's also stewardship. It's both, depending on, your intention and also the long-term goals for the future. So in terms of global stewardship, there are different, what's interesting about that space, how it is expressed depends a lot on your donor's location, the culture, the expectation. There are a lot of that comes into the mix of why the global stewardship, piece can be very, very creative, very colorful, very different from place to place. And we as fundraising professionals have a unique opportunity to be really curious about what that space holds and to learn from that and to work that into our stewardship practice. In terms of the challenges that come with our space, I have to say, it's creative, it's beautiful, it's very rewarding, but there are definitely, that space of global stewardship comes with a number of challenges. Not bad challenges, but you can call them barriers that we have to overcome, because our donors, again, don't live in the same city. We don't actually meet them, and there are a lot of things that we have to kind of keep in mind why our stewardship is even more important than stewarding donors in the same city. And I just, I can point out a few of those, from the distance, from the language differences, cultural norms, communication styles, conflicting day-to-day priorities, and even competing local and nonprofit and charitable needs that are much more front and center for a donor who lives across the globe as maybe for a donor who lives, in the same city or in the same region. Raise your hand for a moment. I mean, we all, like, I'm skipping this because we are all on non-video, so I will skip this for a moment. If you look at your global donors, let's look at them for a second, because it's important to plan your stewardship practice with your global donors in mind, and to put yourself a little bit into the shoes of people who give to a cause, thousands of kilometers or miles from home, and who they are, what they might be thinking, and where they are in their lives. So many of them may be global donors, people who have family and business ties in different countries, maybe in the country where your organization is really active and doing all the great work. Or it may be people who have very limited firsthand connection to your work or community. Both can be true, but figure out, what kind of matters most for a particular donor. Where does he come from? Is he an insider in the community, or is he somebody who really lacks, in-depth information about what's important or what the issues are at hand in your community? They might support multiple causes in different countries. Many of them consider themselves, global citizens and very, culturally active and out there in the world. They might definitely give from different philanthropic cultures. As working in the global space, as much as fundraising is a unifying force, fundraising and how philanthropy is being approached in Europe might differ from North America, might differ from Australia. We have to keep that in mind because it can have implications from the tax incentives, the privacy expectations, naming traditions and recognitions. All of this can be impacted by the different traditions that exist in the communities that your global donor lives in or comes from. They might not fully understand the local context, as I said before, and need more, or are thirsting for more information, more education around this. They certainly need assurance that the gift is used responsibly and meaningfully. Definitely important because of the great distance. They seek trust and clarity before deep engagement. So that's something stewardship really can, do very, very well to increase that trust and the ability for them to give more to your organization, not only in terms of giving, but also in terms of their own involvement. And they want to be part of a shared vision and not just a funding source. And they value, I think it's most importantly in our globally connected world, as much as we all on Zoom together and do all great things across continents, people value authentic human connection, despite the lack of physical proximity that we don't have. So keep that in mind when you think about a stewardship practice, that many of your donors might have some of these things in common. It might be a match. Some others might be, might not exactly fit that, kind of group or characteristics, but it can guide you a little bit to be sensitive to finding out what is really important to your donors. When you look at stewardship, there are an ability to put kind of a framework around how you can look at global stewardship in a way that is very similar to stewardship that we do day to day, day in and day out with donors who are much closer to us geographically. So when you look at the ability to put a framework around it, a framework that works very well is a framework that's called the gift model. And the gift model basically talks about 4 different pillars of stewardship that can help us, almost like give us a little guardrails and a roadmap towards how we can steward our donors the best. One element is gratitude. It's one big pillar, and that's the most familiar one. It's insight, follow through, and trust. And you might remember all of these terms came a little bit earlier in a slide, and I introduced them when we talked about stewardship. And I want to talk about all of them a little bit for you to see what this can do for you. So gratitude, don't have to say much about gratitude. We all know what that looks like. And in terms of looking at that slide and not reading all of the different ideas that are on there, let me point out that in the global stewardship practice, really the key to all of this is not leaving anything to not doing anything random. And that's what, again, Heather, when you asked before about intentionality, that's why it's so important. You have to make this a priority. You do many of these things for your local donors. Do this even more so for your global donors. If you do 10% of stewardship for your local donors, opt this and do double the efforts for people who live far from your area of impact in your organization. It goes a long way to reach people's hearts and minds if they are not close to you and don't see you every single day. So you have a number of different, ideas here, what this could look like in terms of the gratitude. It has both a formal component, but also a very personal component, which is again incredibly important because of the desire to build authentic relationships and to connect people to your mission and to your organization, the people that are that you make your organization really thrive and every day they want to connect the people in the organization. So there are multiple ways you can do this in your practice. And there are also, examples what this could look like in terms of very personal ways of saying thank you in different ways. So you see here on this chart the number of ideas here, and they all are ideas, but it all means do more than one idea. You need to do the thank you letter for sure. It's important, no question, but there is much more that you can do to reinforce the gratitude that your organization has for the donor who made a commitment to you. And you see some ideas here on the screen, and many of them in the international space can be very personal and don't have to have a formal, very, very styled way of doing it. A very personal WhatsApp message or little video clip from somebody from your, executive director as an example, or somebody, a program staff who feels the impact of the gift, can be as powerful as a really well-designed thank you mailing that you send to a donor. Experiment with it, be creative, but be authentic in your voice to the donor who wants to be touched by you and wants to also feel that they belong to your donor community. And when you look at the inside one, the inside is really about, somebody said in the chat before about the impact. That's where that really comes in the greatest. It's about the why and what of the meaningful of this donors ability to learn why their gift was so important to you, why it was so meaningful, what their gift basically has contributed to your work. And here there are a number of different ideas what that means in practice as well. I would say more than even on the gratitude side, here the idea of thinking about whom I'm talking to, where are my donors outside of my country of impact. How can I talk to them that it resonates with them? How can I simplify my language? How can I explain more to them about the context? How can I make it more, real for them because they are miles and kilometers away from us? How can I break it down to them in ways that makes it personal to them and helps them really embrace the power of their giving? And there are a number of different, concrete examples as well that I put here out for you, and everybody will receive the slides and you will be able to go a little bit deeper when you read through the examples. It's just like a toolbox I want to give to you. Important, I would say, I want to point out here in all the opportunities that you have, make it, figure out ways to get as much as possible in front of your donors also. If it's on Zoom or if it's in person, if it's through visits where donors live in particular region, of doing special events and special briefings, in regions where you have a number of donors present, if it's about bringing together community of global donors online. Nowadays, there's so many different opportunities to build that community and to connect people to each other that you can definitely dive into and leverage.
Yeah, and Tanya, so with I'm just looking at some of the suggestions you have here. It's like the impact conversation, like a virtual town hall kind of thing, insider briefings. Is the purpose of these to just share information with the donors, or are you trying to create something beyond just giving updates? Like, are you looking, is this a one-way dialogue, or are you trying to foster a two-way engagement?
I think it goes back to, what I saw so much showing up in the chat before. It's about the relationships and the connections. Using stewardship as really a cultivation and engagement tool, and doing this thoughtfully to show gratitude, obviously, and to show the impact. And depending on, the donors who really want to see data, they want to see not only stories from the field, but they're really diving into what their gift has done. And there are other people who are not as much interested in the data, much more interested in, being connected to your organization, feeling valued by your leadership, feeling like an insider, being at home with an organization that they feel like they can say, oh, this is an organization that's dear to me, I support, I am part of that community. Use this as a way to really learn and to deepen relationships. That's, again, go back to all what stewardship at the end of the day is about. If it's just about sending out the thank you letter, you've done your part. You had manners, you were drafting a nice letter, you made it ideally personal, and you showed it wasn't like an automatic message, and you sent it out, and that's beautiful. You can say, I've done it, I stewarded, I thanked, I showed gratitude, I did my part. But then the real beauty of the stewardship work comes into, the next steps, what you can do to leverage this and to build on this. And it's all about the relationships. As much as good causes, attract people and make people give, at the end of the day, if a person doesn't feel good about you as an organization, doesn't feel really passionate about you, not only what you do, but also because they believe that, you are the right person, it's pleasurable to be with you, they believe in the CEO, they trust the program staff, they will not go the extra mile or the extra kilometer for you. So that's why, again, going back, there is this blurred line between, this very much blurred line between stewardship and engagement. So when you look at follow through, it's, more, it goes to the how and when of delivering commitments. It's, I would say, not only having manners about sending out a thank you letter, but also being professional in your entire contact and building, you want to build, again, this relationship. That's really what this is all about at the end of the day, for the long term. And you develop a way of communicating with a donor that is respectful, professional, and always keeps in mind that the donor really made a personal decision to give a donation to you and not to somebody else. So how can you, in your own conduct, really be as thoughtful and as professional as possible, and use this to, really kind of strengthen that relationship and make a donor feel really good about who you are and how you approach your work. And examples are, there are a lot of in this stage is, that stewardship doesn't just, again, and with the thank you letter, it doesn't just and or begin or end with somebody then following up and sending a personal, let's say, voice note. Stewardship can be a longer process that can continue for months at a time. And that's why the intentionality is, again, so critical of building that into your I would say, fundraising calendar, your stewardship calendar, ideally, of knowing that even if I thank the donor today for the gift, and my CEO calls him next week to share a personal thank you for him, I want to follow up with the donor at least in 3 months from now, or even earlier, because I want to share again. I remember you gave this gift. This is what it did. It was so important. It touched so many lives. Whatever, is appropriate for you, build this into the gratitude does not begin or end in this first, let's say, week or so after the gift was received. That's what it all means about follow through. Follow through with your gratitude and your commitment to the donor to steward the donor well. And when you look at trust, I know I'm looking carefully about the time also. When you look at the trust is, they all connect, the gratitude, the insight, the follow through, and the trust building, all these different pillars connect greatly. And if you look at the trust building piece, donors across the globe, even more so than a donor on site in the community, they make a big, I would say they stretch a lot to give a significant amount of their money to an organization that is not in their home country. Again, sometimes they have they know much about you. Sometimes they know very little about you, but they make a big stretch of giving to you and not giving locally, that kind of donation. You want to make sure that the trust building that comes along with them being so many kilometers of miles away from you, that you nurture this and you build that trust over time. And that, again, is all what stewardship can do so beautifully if done well and authentically, that you can build that trust very naturally over time. So I said before, you have to have different touch points of stewardship, not just a thank you letter. It's about also bringing the donor into an insider view of, what if it's financial highlights or other behind the scenes stories that can build the trust. It can take so many different forms. And obviously, when you look at these 4 pillars, they not only connect to each other, but there's also great overlap. So think about that framework overall as a roadmap, as a way for you to think about it. And at the end of the day, in your practice, things will morph between trust building and follow through and gratitude. They all kind of mix together. But it helps you kind of think about, what do we have to pay attention to and how can we approach our stewardship? Do we have, are we in line with the 4 pillars? Are we good? Are we hitting some of these important, components or ingredients, let's say, of these pillars? How are we doing on this? And that's what this framework, that I came up with for the session really can just help you do. It's not like a big, a big new development. It's just like a framework for you to work with. So I will, when I ask Sue for a favor to launch another poll, a poll that we are curious about to hear from you, looking at these 4 pillars. Which of these pillars you believe at the moment is really the strongest in your organization? Which one you feel like you got it, you love doing it?
I wonder if we can ask people to put it in the chat, because the poll seems to be not launching at the moment, if that's okay.
Oh, how about this? How about this? If you want to do this in the chat, do it. And it takes a little more time. And I'm looking at the time also very closely. I will move on right now a little bit, Sue. I will just skip that. If you want to share that in chat while I'm talking, I will absolutely grab some of your comments and get back to that. In our last, time together, in the next 10 minutes or so, I want to look a little bit at some of the learnings in the different stewardship practices in the core region of UK, US, and Europe, and give you some ideas of what might be the same and what might be different. And at the end of this little kind of overview of how people communicate differently, what their recognition styles are, and so on and so forth, really is the importance that you have to keep in mind that there's really one key thing that all connects us, no matter what language we speak, no matter what our philanthropic practices are. Giving is highly emotional, no matter if you live in the UK, if you live in Australia, in the US, or France, or Italy, it doesn't matter. It is very, very personal. People want to feel good about the giving. People care what they give to. It's personal, it's meaningful. That does not change no matter where you live. It's something highly meaningful and gratifying for an individual. And our way of looking at the differences is just like, what can we do as fundraising professionals a tick better to talk to them in the way that is most impactful to our donors who might live somewhere else. Okay, so it's important to note, it's like it's also a little bit of a framework that helps you think about what you might want to refine or change a little bit in your current stewardship practice. So when you look at, there's one area about tone and communication, and when you look at the three really core markets of US, UK, and Central Europe, I would say for me, coming from a place like Germany, which is definitely the Central European row here, I had to learn the language of fundraising and donor communication in the United States, which was very different from a communication style that I was used to in Germany. And that's something I think I want to point out to many of you who are from Europe or other places outside the United States and Canada, that in the US, communication tends to be much more enthusiastic, sometimes warm, story-driven, and also informal than it is in most of Europe and some other parts of the world. And it might be a little bit challenging at times from a European to kind of feel okay with that kind of style, but I really encourage you, really embrace it. It's a lot of fun. It has so many opportunities. People respond to really warm, enthusiastic communication in the US much more than Europeans sometimes, are used to. And if you look at that chart here, there's a lot of, similarities between the UK, obviously, and Central Europe. There's no right and there's no wrong. We're all different people and we all come from different places. But if you are your organization in the UK and communicate with a donor outside, keep in mind, switch something up, stretch a little bit, be more emotional in your communication. It can really go a long way. And if you're an organization in the United States and you really have, you work for an organization that is outside, just check yourself and see, maybe that's a little bit too informal for somebody who doesn't live here and is not used to this way of communicating, and I have to be a little bit more restrained, or I have to be more data driven, I have to be, less emotional in my communication or how I express my gratitude. They might not be used to it. So get a sense for this, know that this exists, and just learn in your practice, where people are at, but understand that people really are a little bit different in the different regions and respond to different styles of communication in your stewardship practice. And when you look at recognition preferences, there are also differences across these core, I would say, fundraising and philanthropy markets. And there are similarities, obviously, to the communication styles. Fundraising philanthropy is it's very big in the United States. From a society point of view, it's really very important. It's a must for many, and therefore there's a much more openness to public recognition, naming opportunities, and it's what people often require or ask for, whereas in the rest of in the world, and particularly the UK and in Europe, that is sometimes it's less of a norm. And work with that, learn from it, work with it, and figure out a way that really what makes sense for you in your day-to-day work. But just remember that what is normal to you might not be exactly the norm for people who are outside of your home country. When you look at the last piece about relationship style, I would say that the big thing that ties it together is that the trust building, I would say, and professionalism that is needed, particularly for donors in Europe, it takes much longer to build that trust and to build that relationship than sometimes for donors in the United States. And obviously, all of what we talked about today, there are trends and observations. There are always, exception to the rule. But you see there are kind of themes in that way of communicating, relationship style and recognition that can be really helpful as you draft your reports, as you draft your thank you letters, if you send personal video updates or messages on WhatsApp. All of this kind of is impacted by what people are used to in terms of their communication and their relationships on a day in and day out basis.
I just want to ask a quick question that came up in the chat, which I think it's relevant to catch it while we're on the slide. So for honorifics, would you say that those are more expected in donor communications outside the US? So using, Mr., Ms., kind of addressing donors using that versus less so in the US.
I mean, I would definitely say so. I mean, in the US, people address, I mean, no matter who you are, it's much more common. And I tell you, after over 20 years in the States, sometimes I still feel it's not appropriate, but people are much more on the first name basis than anywhere else. It's just a different way of communicating. It can break down barriers much easier. And sure, if depending on where you're looking at on a globe, it's important to recognize that in other countries, it's very, very important to make sure that all your titles, also all your credentials, are really listed on the address, in the salutation, you name it. These are specifics, and that sometimes in some countries can make people, and again, it's not really, it's just sad, but it's a reality. People are very sensitive about, and it's very personal, and people can become, dissatisfied with you because you're not recognizing who they are. So really pay attention to this more than you think. It's I remember in one organization I worked with years ago, we never forget this, how many envelopes we had to rip because some were the salutation wasn't exactly correct, or there were things missing on the name line. And at that time, it was in my early 20s. I'm like, oh, it's an exaggeration. Why do you have to make a big deal about this? But believe me, I understand today that, yes, it goes a long way. Rip envelopes, do all of this, get this right. It goes a long way. It's a little thing, but goes a long way. I want to, maybe stop for a moment the slides and just say a few things at the end of our time together before we can open up Q&A. Important in that space is, you don't have to come up with all the specifics by yourself. You can create a wonderful stewardship plan that can look beautiful on paper, but it might really miss the mark, or it might be too much. You have to put too much efforts into it. It's too much for the size of your organization or your staff to really man on an annual basis. You are not alone in this. Bring donors that give, who live outside, international, global donors, no matter, how you might refer to them. Bring some of them into the conversation and ask them what really matters to them and to peers of them. What can the organization do better in their stewardship practices? What are they not hearing from yet? What would they like to hear more? Run ideas by them and ask for their feedback. That's really a super, I would say, easy and powerful way of engaging them, showing value of their opinion, but also showing them, I see you. I know that you are not only a donor to us, but I know you live abroad. You're not close to us. What can we do to make this entire experience better for you? And that's where, again, the creativity and the conversation really start to flourish. And I think you're going to have a lot of opportunities and a lot of fun with, actually, because again, stewardship morphs easily then into engagement and cultivation. And then you're on the right track and you have an ability to build these relationships to, you know, really introduce future giving in a very sweet way. And what you will receive, after, I want to say one last thing before some questions. If you have an opportunity, also, the same holds true with your case for support, your fundraising case for support. It's really important to tailor it to your global donor audience. And on the slide deck, you will see some ideas what you can do to make this happen. And you will also have there's some more additional slides in a slide deck that can help you in your practice. But I think, Heather, it's important to get some questions from our colleagues here in the session.
We've just had one pop in about some examples of meaningful touchstones outside of tailored emails or impact reports.
Yeah, so tailored touch points can go from the formal ROM to the more informal or more personal ROM. And can be a blend. Formal can be things like an impact report that is very, more to a larger audience. It can mean having a special report geared to a donor that says, I remember you gave 3 months ago this amazing gift. I want to update you on what your gift has done, where we are in the process, just to keep donors, updated. And sometimes that is more generic, and sometimes it's really important to gear this to a particular donor, that a donor gets it and sees like, oh, she's really talking to me. She's not just sending a mass, email or a mass mailing to everybody. No, she's talking to me. I see that she knows who I am. So things like that can be both personal and formal, and can take the form of both, data-driven impact, what has your gift done and what we have accomplished together, to a form of bringing the voices in of people who are benefiting from the gift. It can be students at the university. It can be people who, are program staff who now have can accomplish more in their program work for the organization because of your giving. So it can take different forms. And again, it's very unique to your organization, and it can be, little video clips that people do on the field, not edited anything, like really authentic. And it can be something much more, I don't know, edited or more curated, that comes from your organization, is being distributed to a much larger audience. So have fun with this and be creative. There is not a right or wrong way to do it. It's just like really a blend of the formal and the informal piece. And as much as you're authentic and people understand that you see them, they're not just a donor giving money, but you see them as people, then you can be successful no matter what you really develop in the stewardship realm.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. I'm going to get to one more question. I know there's also one that's been in the chat about where can we find more research on that. We'll include resources for you when we send out the recording and the slide deck, so we will get to that. But the question I wanted to just ask before we wrap up here is, so Eloise has asked or said that there's a belief in their organization that if you're not from the US, you can't successfully prospect, you can't steward in the US. Similar thing being said about India, where they're also looking to fundraise. What would you recommend? Like, what's the response to that? I have an opinion, but you're our expert for today.
So for somebody who has learned really the ropes of international fundraising and philanthropy in the States, you know, coming from Germany and moving to the States and having no clue about really what philanthropy and fundraising was all about in my own, just, you know, to reveal my own background. I think this is not correct. I have to say that. I think if the important part is you have to be curious and you have to know, you have to be interested in people, and you have to learn again what is important to people in a particular country, if it's US or India. Learn what, you know, how it's being done there. You know, you can ask donors, you can ask people in the field in India, you can do so many different things to learn and to be curious about it. And I'm telling you that people don't just want to, donors connect, not if somebody gives to an organization outside of their home country, they love the ability to connect with somebody who is, again, when I say authentic, it's like funny to say this, but who is somebody who is from the country where they're giving to. You know, they love to hear a voice that is different from an US voice. They appreciate the different perspective because, again, it's all about the relationship and the authenticity. So you are stewarding somebody who sees as an opportunity for him or herself to learn from you and to ask questions and say, how is it going on the ground there? You know, like, again, people are curious. They are invested globally for a reason. So leverage this. You know, there's not a right or wrong. People love to connect with people who care about them, who are authentic, no matter what their background is. As long as, you know, they understand, you know, we have differences, we have a lot in common, and we want to build a community of people who, you know, cherish the work that we do, and we appreciate, you know, being together in that space.
Absolutely. And it really comes down to, I think, just the basic rule of fundraising is that for a donor to give, there needs to be linkage, ability, and interest. So what is it? Do they have any link to your relationship through personal experience, your friends, your family? Do they have the ability to give? Do they have resources available to make philanthropic gifts? And are they interested in you? Do they care about the work that you're doing? Do they care about your mission, your cause? What you're trying to achieve in the world. And I think that is something that goes beyond borders. That's any donor anywhere. Those are the three things that are going to mean the most as far as getting, you know, being successful in your international fundraising. Now, I'm just going to use that as a segue to wrap us up, but to further respond to that question. So Chapel New York, we call ourselves the home of international fundraising and philanthropy. We work around the globe, but when we started, you know, almost 30 years ago, the focus was on working with organizations who were fundraising in the US. So Fundraising America, and it was helping them set up and run 501c3 charitable organizations. And that we continue to do that. And of our family of foundations, our US foundation continues to have the most interest. It has the most funds set up within it. So I would say there are a number of organizations from all around the world who are actively fundraising in the US who aren't from here, doing quite well, stewarding and prospecting donors in the US. There actually is I've seen a growing interest in India, particularly in the last year. So it seems like that's an area where a lot of organizations are looking who aren't based there and are doing so successfully. So yes, it is possible. You don't have to be from here. And again, what really matters is the relationship that donor has with you and your cause. But I just want to thank Tanya so much for being with us today. Thank you, Tanya. We will share her slides, as well as be able to have some insight into what we didn't get to in our conversation today, such as the case for support, which I think you'll find very useful. We'll also send this recording out to you. And there was a question about, where can we find more information about navigating those cultural differences? It was on that slide, so we'll send you a good suggestion or two on that as well. But many thanks to you all for being here today. We hope you'll join us again on a future webinar. And Tanya, I hope you'll join us again for a future webinar as well. I feel like there's so much more we could cover today.
Thank you.